equals the dawn came quietly, as it always did, with the slow stirring of light over the waters of the great river. Mist rose in pale threads, curling like the breath of spirits that lingered between worlds. The people of the river gathered in silence, their faces painted with clay and ash, their eyes turned toward the water. This was no ordinary morning. It was the time of the river ceremony, when the elders called upon the Great Spirit to bless the tribe and remind them of the sacred balance that bound life to water, sky, and earth. Drums began softly, like heartbeats. A line of elders, wrapped in furs, despite the warmth of the season, stepped to the edge of the bank, their voices lifted in a chant older than memory, their tones weaving through the mist like chords of power. The tribe swayed gently to the rhythm, listening not only with ears, but with spirit. Each note carried stories of ancestors who once walked with animals, of rivers that flowed before people had names, of promises made between the people and the Great Spirit who breathed life into all things. Among the crowd stood Wakia young, proud, and already marked by destiny. His name meant thunder, and like thunder, he carried a presence that could not be ignored. Though still a youth, his visions were powerful, his voice commanding, his rituals stirring in ways that unsettled even seasoned elders. Wakia's eyes were sharp, restless, scanning the mist as though searching for something hidden. Where others bowed their heads in reverence, Wakia lifted his chin, daring to meet the unseen face of the Great Spirit. Then, as the chanting reached its peak, Elder Nayeli, the oldest among them, stepped forward. Her back was bent, her hair as white as the foam of the river, yet her voice rang clear, echoing over the water. She raised her staff, carved with sacred symbols of sun, river, and eagle. The people fell still, for this was the moment when prophecy might come, and prophecy always demanded silence. Nayeli's voice carried like wind through the reeds. Hear, now, children of the living river. The Great Spirit speaks through the waters and the sky. One shall rise among you, whose words are stronger than the storm, whose tongue reaches toward the heavens. He will dare to speak where silence belongs. He will dare to command what must not be commanded. But remember, this the river remembers. All voices and silence will claim the proud. Gasps rippled through the gathering. Mothers held their children closer. Warriors exchanged wary glances. Such prophecies came rarely, and when they did, they left shadows on every heart. Wakia's breath quickened. His hands trembled, not with fear, but with something sharper hunger. Words so strong they dared challenge the Great Spirit. Could it be him? Had the prophecy spoken of his gift, his destiny? Others bowed in humility. Wakia stood taller. The ceremony continued. Offerings of cedar and sage cast upon the river's surface, prayers whispered into the rising sun. But Wakia barely heard them. His mind blazed with the weight of the prophecy. Since childhood, he had felt set apart. While others dreamed of hunting or family, Wakia dreamed of fire in the sky, of rivers turning to silver threads, of voices calling his name from places beyond the world of men. Elders praised his gifts, but also warned him, visions are a burden, not a crown. Power without humility becomes poison. Yet humility had never satisfied him. As the last drumbeat faded and the elders closed the ceremony, the people began to disperse. The mist thinned, drifting across the surface of the water, leaving only ripples where offerings floated. Wakia lingered by the riverbank, staring at his reflection in the shifting water. His face wavered, changing with each ripple, as though the river itself struggled to decide who he truly was. He bent closer, whispering to the water, "If the prophecy is mine, then I will not fear. I will speak where no one has dared. Even the Great Spirit will hear my voice." For a moment, nothing answered but the soft lap of water against stone. Then, so faint it might have been imagination, heard it, a whisper, curling up from the depths like a thread of smoke. "Wakia." He froze, heart hammering. The sound was not his own voice, nor the wind, nor the song of birds. It was the river itself, carrying his name as though it had been waiting all along. The whisper came again, softer, yet filled with weight. Wakia, his breath caught. The prophecy was no longer just words spoken by an elder. It had entered him, wrapped itself around his bones. Behind him, the tribe moved away, laughing, talking, returning to daily tasks. None seemed to hear what the river had spoken. This voice was his alone. Wakia clenched his fists. His path was clear now, clearer than the rising sun. If the Great Spirit had given him such a gift, then he would not cower like the others. He would not bow his head in endless obedience. He would rise above them all. The whisper of the river faded into silence, but its echo stayed inside him, pulsing like a second heartbeat. He turned from the water with a look of fire in his eyes. The prophecy was not a warning, it was a promise, and Wakia intended to claim it, as the first eagle of morning soared across the sky. Wakia swore to himself that one day, the Great Spirit would hear his voice. Yet deep below, the river stirred, and whispered once more, too low for him to hear. Silence will claim the proud. The river was more than water. It was breath. It was food. It was memory itself. From its wide silver currents came fish that fed the tribe through every season. From its banks grew reeds for baskets, clay for pots, and herbs for healing. The river carried canoes to distant hunting grounds, and its steady flow was a reminder that life moved in cycles, never still, never ending. The people called themselves children of the living river, for they believed its spirit flowed through their veins. When a child was born, a drop of river water was placed on their tongues so they would carry the river's voice within them. When an elder died, their ashes were given back to the current, returning their wisdom to the eternal waters. At dawn, the tribe greeted the sun by bowing toward the river. At night, they listened to its soft murmur before sleep, knowing ancestors whispered through the waves. To live by the river was not just survival, it was a covenant with the Great Spirit. Every firelit evening, after the day's hunting and gathering ended, the elders spoke. Children sat wide-eyed, shadows dancing on their faces, as they heard of the first people who emerged from the union of earth and water. They learned that the Great Spirit had shaped the river with his own hand, giving it the power to heal, to feed, and to guide. But he had also given it the power to punish. Those who wasted its gifts or defied its balance were said to vanish, their voices swallowed forever by the waters. Remember, Elder Nayeli would say, her eyes deep as the river at night, the Great Spirit does not shout. His lessons are carried in silence. Those who will not listen will learn the hard way. The tribe honored her words, but one among them, young Wakia, listened differently. Where others heard warnings, Wakia heard challenges. Wakia sat near the fire, but apart from the others, the flickering light catching the sharp lines of his face. He was strong and gifted, with visions that came unbidden, and chants that stirred wind and rain more than any other youth. The people whispered that he carried thunder in his chest, but with every gift came pride. Wakia believed the old stories held truth, yet he also believed he could surpass them. If the ancestors had spoken with the Great Spirit in dreams, why could he not speak with him directly, face to face? If the river was guardian, why should it not obey the one chosen to command it? Humility, the elders said, was the root of wisdom. Yet Wakia's roots reached upward, straining always for the sky, never content to remain in the soil. Elder Nayeli, keeper of prophecy, saw his hunger. One evening, she called Wakia to her lodge, its smoke rising like a slender column into the starlit sky. She laid before him a carved bowl of water, still as glass. "Look, Wakia," she said. "This water is like the Spirit. It holds all things, reflects all things. But see how still it is. That stillness is strength. Now watch." She tapped the surface. Ripples spread, breaking the reflection into fragments. "Pride does this," she whispered. "It disturbs the stillness. A little, and the water recovers. Too much, and it breaks forever. Wakia studied the ripples, but only half listened. He saw in the water not warnings, but the promise of power. If ripples could spread so far from a single touch, what might his voice achieve? Elder, he said, his tone respectful, but firm. Perhaps the Great Spirit does not ask for stillness. Perhaps he waits for someone brave enough to disturb the water. Nayeli sighed. Disturb the river, and you may not like what answers. You, where Wakia reached upward. Kaya walked gently. She was his equal in training, another chosen to learn the ways of the shaman, but her strength lay in humility. Kaya listened to the animals, learning their wisdom. Birds would land near her without fear. Wolves watched her from the forest's edge, as though acknowledging kinship. She treated every living thing as teacher, and in turn, the tribe trusted her. When children scraped their knees, they ran to Kaya. When hunters returned weary, they sought her herbs. And when dreams frightened the young, Kaya's gentle voice soothed them. The people loved Wakia's power, but they respected Kaya's kindness. And Wakia noticed. It burned within him like hidden fire, that Kaya's soft presence earned what his thunderous voice could not. His visions were stronger, his chants more stirring, yet her name was spoken with warmth, while his carried fear. Envy, like a seed, took root in Wakia's heart. During one council gathering, Elder Nayeli praised Kaya for interpreting a vision of deer migrating early, which saved the tribe from hunger. The people applauded her wisdom. Wakia sat rigid, his jaw tight, thinking, I saw storms before they came. I called rain to the fields. Why do they cheer for her and not me? When Kaya passed him later, she offered a smile. We are both learning, Wakia. The river has many voices. Perhaps it has chosen me to hear some, and you to hear others. But Wakia did not smile back. He thought, no, the river will choose only one voice, and it will be mine. That night, Wakia lay restless, sleep refusing him. The fire's embers glowed like watching eyes, and the river's murmur seemed louder than ever, as though calling him to listen. Finally, exhaustion carried him into dream. He stood in a vast plain of stars. Before him towered a figure of light, vast and unshaped, the Great Spirit. Wakia felt both awe and defiance rise in him. Slowly, he lifted himself higher, higher, until he stood taller than the spirit itself. His chest swelled with pride. His voice thundered like storms. I am Wakia, and even you must hear me. But then he looked down. The ground beneath his feet had become water. Not the shining river of his homeland, but a black, sluggish current. It writhed with shadows, swallowing everything in its path. The stars above vanished, leaving only silence. The water rose, clutching at his legs, pulling him down. He tried to shout again, but his voice came out broken, swallowed by the endless dark. He awoke, drenched in sweat, his heart racing. Outside, the river flowed, calm and silver in the moonlight. Yet, in his ears, he still heard the echo of that dream, the silence of black water, and the weight of the spirit's gaze. Wakia sat alone, at the river's edge, the dream burning in his mind. He whispered into the night, if I must stand taller than the Great Spirit, then so be it. And from the darkened current, unseen, the river whispered back its voice, low and cold. Then, you must also learn the silence beneath. The days after Wakia's troubling vision were filled with silence, silence he tried to ignore. By day, he walked proudly among his people, healing the sick, blessing the hunters, and performing the chants he had mastered. By night, he returned to the river's edge, staring into its depths, wondering if the Great Spirit truly heard him. The tribe admired him. When storms threatened their crops, Wakia raised his arms, chanting in tones that shook the air. Thunder answered, rain fell, and the people rejoiced. They whispered, he truly carries thunder within him. But what? They did not see what Wakia hid from the elders was that these were not the chants passed down through tradition. He had altered them. bending ancient words into new forms. Words he had found in visions. Words that felt powerful, but carried a strange weight, like stone pressing on his spirit. The chants were not his alone. They came to him in dreams, whispered by shadows in the mist, by winds that curled strangely through the trees. Wakia woke from such dreams with words burning in his throat, words no elder had taught him. When he spoke them aloud, storms bent to his call, lightning crawled across the sky like serpents, and rain poured at his command. It was intoxicating. But the animals grew uneasy. Dogs barked into the night for no reason. Horses stamped nervously when Wakia passed. The deer in the forest avoided the village, and even the fish seemed harder to catch near the riverbank. Birds, once constant companions, now wheeled wide circles overhead, refusing to land near camp. The elders noticed, but they did not yet see Wakia's hand in it. They only warned the people to give thanks, to stay humble. Wakia listened with a hidden smirk. Soon, Wakia began to speak differently when the elders were not near. To the younger hunters and the restless youths, he said, "Why do we bow our heads so low? Why do we wait for signs when I can bring the storm myself? The Great Spirit favors me above the rest. Even Elder Nayeli Wise, though she cannot summon the rain as I do." The young ones laughed nervously at first, but some believed him. They saw his power, the way the clouds obeyed, the way thunder followed his voice. They began to admire not just his chants, but his boldness. Each whispered word of pride planted seeds of doubt against the old ways. And still, Wakia's heart grew heavier with envy for Kaya. For all his power, it was her name spoken with trust. Hunters praised her herbs, mothers sought her guidance, and children listened to her gentle stories. Why do they turn to her? Wakia thought bitterly, when I can command storms. One evening, Wakia stood alone by the river. The sky above was streaked with crimson, clouds glowing like embers. As he whispered his forbidden chants to test their strength, a shadow fell across him. A raven landed on a nearby branch, its feathers dark as midnight. It stared at him with one unblinking eye, tilting its head as if amused. Ravens were not uncommon, but this one felt different. Wherever Wakia walked, it followed, perching on trees, watching from rooftops, even circling above his lodge at dawn. When he performed his chants, it croaked approvingly, its harsh cry echoing like laughter. The elders avoided speaking of it, but Kaya's eyes darkened when she noticed. "A raven follows you, Wakia," she said quietly. "Be careful. The raven is a trickster's shadow. It brings riddles, not truth." Wakia only laughed. "Perhaps the trickster favors me, too. Even the spirits cannot resist my voice." Kaya, unlike Wakia, kept her heart open to the spirits and gentleness. One night, after long prayers, at the riverbank, she fell into a vision. She saw the great river stretch before her, wide and shining. But as she watched, the water began to sink, faster and faster, until the bed was dry and cracked. Fish lay gasping on the earth, their scales turning to dust. The land split open, and people cried out in thirst. At the center of the dry river stood Wakia, arms raised, his voice echoing in defiance. But when he opened his mouth, no sound came. His lips moved, his face contorted with fury, but the silence was absolute. Kaya awoke, trembling. She knew what it meant. The spirits were warning her. Wakia's pride would drain not only his own voice, but the river's life as well. At dawn, Kaya went to Wakia. He stood near the water, as he often did, staring at his reflection, as if testing whether the river would speak his name again. "Wakia," she said, her voice steady, though her hands shook. "I have seen the river dry. I have seen the people suffer. This path you walk will bring silence, not strength. Turn back before it is too late." He turned, eyes flashing with pride. "Silence. The river may dry, but I will command it to flow again. The Great Spirit himself will hear me and obey." Kaya stepped back, her heart heavy. She had hoped he might listen, but she saw now that pride had already closed his ears. Above them, the raven cawed sharply, as if mocking her warning. Wakia looked back to the river, his reflection rippling in the dark water. He whispered to himself, "If the river dares run dry, I will command it to flow again." And in the stillness, the raven's cry echoed across the sky, harsh, cold, and filled with foreboding. The sun scorched the earth with merciless hands. Crops cracked and curled under its heat, the green of the fields turning brittle and brown. Fish floated lifeless on the surface of the river, their scales glinting like shattered glass. The river, once a shimmering lifeline, now whispered only emptiness. The tribe grew restless. Hunger gnawed at bellies, fear at hearts. They gathered in small groups by the riverbank, offering prayers, chants, and tears to the Great Spirit. Yet the water remained still, silent as stone. Elder Nayeli called a council beneath the skeletal remains of an ancient oak. Her eyes, deep and sorrowful, scanned the faces of the young and old alike. "We have angered the balance," she said, voice heavy. "The river answers only those who walk with humility. Force will not bring life, only respect, only harmony, only patience." The people bowed their heads. Many whispered prayers under their breath, begging for rain, for fish, for survival. But one among them did not bow. Wakia stood at the edge of the council, his cloak brushing the dry reeds, eyes burning with something fiercer than fear. "Patience is weakness," he thought. "Harmony is the cage of the timid. I will not wait for the river to grant its mercy on its own. I will speak, and it will obey." That night, Wakia prepared alone. He gathered sacred herbs and carved his chants into the air with the rhythm of his pulse. The stars above flickered, as though peering down to watch him, their silver light trembling. He knelt at the water's edge, feeling the river's dry current slip through his fingers. Then he drew a blade from his belt, sharp and ancient, and cut his palm. Crimson droplets fell onto the parched earth, soaking the dust. "Obey me, Great Spirit," he shouted, his voice echoing across the silent valley. "Obey me, or the living shall perish, and it will be your fault." The river shivered. A wind swept across the reeds, and for a moment, Wakia believed he had been heard. He raised his arms higher, chanting words the elders had forbidden, words that came to him in dreams, spoken by shadows that coiled in the night. Then it came. The river rose. Water surged upward like a living wall, tumbling over itself in an unbroken curtain of silver. The reeds snapped under the pressure, the mud of the riverbank swallowed whole. Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the waves that roared like beasts. The villagers screamed and fled to higher ground. Fires that had burned along the edge of the river were extinguished by the sudden flood, leaving only smoke and wet ash. Wakia's heart leaped. His power, his voice was shaping the world. He laughed, triumphant, raising his bloodied hands to the storm. But then, silence. The river collapsed into itself, as suddenly as it had risen. The waters retreated, leaving the banks cracked, bare, and bitterly dry. The fish floated dead once again. The reeds bowed under nothing, and the river whispered only emptiness. Wakia's triumph twisted into shock. He looked around at the desolate banks. His chants had moved the water, but the river had not obeyed, had obeyed nothing. It had only answered with absence. The next morning, the tribe returned to the river. Their faces were pale with fear and hunger. Elder Nayeli approached Wakia, her staff tapping the cracked mud. "You sought to command what cannot be commanded," she said softly, yet every word struck like stone. "The river is not yours to order. It is not ours to bend. It lives in harmony with the Great Spirit. You have forced it, and the river remembers." Wakia swallowed, pride and panic warring in his chest. "But it responded," he insisted. "I saw it rise." "And it fell," Nayeli replied, voice sorrowful, "and the drought worsens. You have disturbed the balance, not restored." It listen well, Wakia. Power without humility brings only silence. Yet even as she spoke, Wakia felt no fear strong enough to stop him. Something deeper, darker, whispered in the back of his mind. I am stronger than fear. I will speak again. The river will obey me. But the animals of the forest no longer ventured near the village. Birds circled high above, black shapes against the sun, cawing in warning. Even the fish, mere shadows beneath shallow water, seemed to avoid the shore. Something unseen recoiled from him, and Wakia could feel it, prickling along his skin like tiny needles. That night, as Wakia stood alone on the bank, staring into the river's dry current, he heard a voice. Not a shout, not a whisper, but something hollow, deep, resonating through the cracked mud and the shadows of reeds. Your voice is heard. Wakia froze. Every hair on his body stood upright. His chest tightened. He searched the darkness, but saw nothing. But silence awaits. The words carried neither anger nor pity. They were neither promise nor threat. They simply wore an echo from the river itself, the great spirit's reply that needed no sound, no shape, no form. Wakia's knees buckled. He wanted to shout back, to demand meaning, to call the river again, but the water refused to move. The river had heard, yes, but it would not obey. The river, alive and patient, had already begun its judgment. The wind whistled through the reeds, carrying the hollow echo once more. Silence awaits, it repeated, over and over, until Wakia could barely remember the sound of his own voice. The river lay still once more, cracked and empty beneath the pale moon. Wakia dropped to his knees, hands clawing the dry earth, and whispered to himself, the Great Spirit, I command you. And from the depths, where the river should have flowed, the hollow voice replied, your voice is heard. But silence awaits. The sky had turned to iron clouds, thickened and swirled, dark and restless, moving like living beasts across the horizon. Winds tore through the village, bending trees to their knees and scattering the dry leaves that had fallen weeks ago. Birds screamed as they fled the branches, their wings slicing the turbulent air. Wolves howled from the forests, uneasy, as if sensing the tremors in the world itself. The river, once calm, now trembled with hidden force. Its waters did not rise, but the surface writhed like a dark mirror, reflecting the fury above. Fish floated lifeless along the shallow edges, and reeds snapped under the pressure of unseen currents. It was a silence that screamed a quiet heavier than any sound. The people of the tribe gathered in fear, clutching each other, praying to the Great Spirit with voices trembling. Mothers pulled children close, warriors gripped their spears tighter, and even Elder Nayeli, the keeper of wisdom, felt a shadow of dread. For days, storms raged without pause. Sand and dust whipped through the village, tearing roofs from huts and scattering supplies. The crops wilted under relentless heat and sudden frost, a cruel duality that left nothing unscathed. Riversides cracked and buckled, leaving exposed roots that had held the earth for generations. Animals, once companions of the people, abandoned them. Wolves fled deeper into the forest. Birds no longer nested near the village, and the river itself seemed to shrink under the weight of Wakia's defiance. The tribe had never known such suffering. They called to the Great Spirit, raising their arms to the sky, chanting for forgiveness and for rain, but only the wind answered. That night, dreams visited the people. Ancestors appeared, their faces shimmering with translucent light. They spoke in voices like the river itself, flowing through the minds of those who slept. A hunter saw the ghost of his grandfather, warning him that pride had poisoned the balance of life. A mother saw her lost daughter, weeping, whispering that arrogance would bring famine and sorrow. Even Wakia's own mentor, Elder Nayeli, dreamed of spirits standing in judgment, pointing toward the river and shaking their heads. In each vision, Wakia's silhouette loomed, hands raised, words stolen by the void. The ancestors murmured warnings. Balance is broken. The river's wrath is near. Silence will not wait. The people argued among themselves. Many blamed Wakia, saying his arrogance had provoked the Great Spirit and the river alike. Others, awed by his previous power, defended him, insisting that he was chosen and that only he could restore balance. "You saw him make the rains come," they whispered. "He has the gift. Do not condemn him for what we do not understand." But the fires of the storms continued. Houses splintered, food stores dwindled, and the river gave nothing. Even those who still defended Wakia felt unease twist in their hearts. Kaya, watching from the shadows, knew in her soul that the young shaman had gone too far. His pride had stretched beyond what the river could tolerate. That night Kaya knelt by the river's edge, hands pressed to the cool stones, seeking guidance. She closed her eyes, letting the whispering currents fill her mind. The river spoke not in sound, but in vision. Water swirled into shapes, forming faces of those long past. They looked at her with grave eyes, pointing toward Wakia. "He must be bound," the vision said, the currents twisting around her fingers like silver threads. "Or all will drown in silence. The river cannot forgive defiance, only contain it." Kaya's eyes opened, wide and fearful. She turned to see Wakia standing farther down the bank, silhouetted against the storm, arms raised, defying the fury around him. He did not flinch at the winds tearing through his cloak. He did not falter as lightning split the sky near his feet. Instead, he lifted his voice against the storm itself, chanting louder than he ever had before. "If the Great Spirit wishes silence," he shouted, "then let him face my voice again." His words carried through the tempest, echoing like thunder and rolling down the river's length. Trees bent and riversides shivered at the force, yet the water did not move, the fish did not swim. The river remained obstinately still. The raven appeared, circling above him, wings black against the silver flashes of lightning. It croaked, a harsh laugh that cut through the roar of the storm, as though mocking Wakia's boldness. Even Kaya could feel the air shift around him. Pride had become a storm more dangerous than the sky itself, but she knew, deep within, that the river's patience was finite. As Wakia chanted into the night, the river's surface darkened unnaturally, reflecting neither star nor moon. The water twisted and writhed, like shadowed snakes. It was as though it were holding itself back, waiting, gathering strength. "Kaya," whispered a prayer beneath her breath, hoping for restraint. "Great Spirit," she murmured, "teach him balance before the river swallows all." But Wakia did not hear. He was deaf to caution, drunk on the power that had once answered him, blind to the warnings already etched in dreams and visions. Above, the raven flapped its wings once more and vanished into the darkness. Its shadow lingered on the water's surface, and in that instant, even Wakia sensed, though he refused to admit it, that the river's patience was ending. Wakia planted his feet firmly on the riverbank, fists raised to the storm, and shouted again, "If the Great Spirit wishes silence, then let him face my voice again." And beneath the surface, deep in the riverbed, something stirred, black and vast, waiting for the moment to claim the defiant shaman. The dawn of that day came shrouded in storm. The wind tore through the village like a living thing, carrying dust, leaves, and fear. Even the river, long silent under the drought, began to stir with an unnatural energy, rippling as though anticipating a confrontation that had waited since the prophecy was first spoken. The tribe gathered at the riverbank, huddled together, eyes wide with terror. Mothers clutched children to their chests, warriors gripped their weapons uselessly, and Elder Nihal's hands trembled around her staff. All around them, the air pulsed with anticipation and dread. At the center of the chaos stood Wakia. His chest rose and fell with furious energy. His hair whipped around his face, wet from the sudden thick rain that began to fall, but he did not flinch. In his eyes blazed defiance, so fierce it seemed to set the clouds themselves aflame. He had prepared for this moment his entire life, or at least his own version of it. Wakia stepped into the shallows of the river, mud squelching beneath his feet. He raised his bloodied hands to the storm. Around him, lightning tore the sky in jagged silver veins, thunder rolling like the drumbeats of the ancestors themselves. "Great Spirit," he shouted, voice carrying over the roar. "Hear me. I call to you directly. I am not a child to bow in silence. I am Wakia, and I demand life. I demand the river. I demand obedience." The river responded. Water swirled upward, curling into waves taller than any tree. The surface shimmered with unnatural light, reflecting fire in the clouds. Fish leaped from the river, startled by the power surging through the currents. The wind howled, carrying the scent of wet earth, smoke, and ozone. Kaya stood at the edge, eyes wide with terror. "Wakia, stop!" she cried, but he did not hear. The storm was his stage, the river his instrument, and his pride had drowned all caution. Then, the storm itself became form. From the swirling clouds and raging river, a presence emerged, immense, formless, yet unmistakably the Great Spirit. It shimmered with light and shadow, flowing like molten silver and dark water simultaneously. Its voice was not yet sound, but presence, filling every fiber of the earth, sky, and water. Wakia felt his pulse quicken, but he did not retreat. He lifted his arms higher, chanting words forbidden even in dreams, believing the storm and river would bend to his will. "Great Spirit," he roared, "I command life and death. I command the river, the skies, and the animals. You must obey me." The river surged, the waves rising like a living wall. Lightning etched the water into jagged mirrors, reflecting 1,000 faces, some his own, some ancestors, some shapes too strange for words. Yet the Great Spirit did not answer. Not with words, not with motion, not with fire or fury. For a long moment, Wakia's voice thundered across the valley. Then, nothing. The storm continued, the river churned, and yet the words in his mouth fell flat, absorbed by a silence so deep it felt as though the earth itself had swallowed them. His throat tightened, his lungs heaving as he tried to chant, to speak, to demand, but no sound came. He opened his mouth again. Still nothing. Panic flared. His hands dropped. His knees buckled slightly in the mud. The roar of the storm pressed in on him from all sides, yet his own voice was gone. The river, the wind, the thunder, they all listened, but did not speak. For the first time in his life, Wakia felt powerless. His pride had promised him mastery over the Great Spirit, but now he understood the depth of his defiance. Words alone could not command the sacred. Power without humility was empty. The tribe, frozen in terror, could only watch. Some whispered apologies to the river. Some prayed silently, hope and fear clashing in their hearts. Elder Naeli's eyes, usually steady and soft, now burned with sorrow. She had foreseen this, but even prophecy could not lessen the tragedy. Kaya stepped forward, trembling, and whispered prayers for mercy. She could feel the river's pulse, the Great Spirit's intent, and she knew what had to be done, but Wakia could not yet see it. Then came a sound, not loud, not harsh, but as deep as the riverbed itself. It vibrated through the mud, the reeds, and Wakia's bones. The Great Spirit spoke, not in words he could grasp, but in authority so absolute, it shook the heavens and the earth alike. "You shall dwell in silence. Bound to the river you defied." The words struck Wakia like lightning. He tried to cry out, to bargain, to shout again, but his voice was gone, stolen by the very force he had sought to command. The storm intensified, the river curling like silver serpents around him, holding him, surrounding him, unyielding. The Great Spirit's presence pressed him to his knees. Every wave, every gust of wind, every crack of lightning reinforced the punishment. He was no longer the master of storms. He was no longer a shaman with visions. He was nothing but a vessel for the silence he had so recklessly summoned. Wakia fell to the riverbank, mud clinging to his knees, arms outstretched in vain. The wind howled, the river churned, and the storm pressed down like judgment itself. You shall dwell in silence, bound to the river you defied. The Great Spirit's voice boomed once more, and Wakia knew that from this moment forward, not even a single word would ever leave his lips. The river had never been quieter, not the quiet of a gentle stream, nor the stillness of midnight. It was a silence that pressed against the ears and chest, heavy as stone. The storm had passed, but the water no longer sang, no longer laughed over the rocks, no longer whispered the soft lessons of the ancestors. At the edge of that silent river stood Wakia, tethered by forces older and deeper than he could have imagined. His body had changed. No longer fully flesh, no longer fully living, he appeared ghost-like, a shimmer of shadow and light along the water's edge. His chest rose and fell, but no breath came. His lips moved, forming words that never left him. The Great Spirit had bound him, marking him forever as a cautionary tale. A shaman silenced, a voice swallowed by the river he had dared defy. The people gathered cautiously along the riverbank, eyes wide with fear and sorrow. Some could not bear to look at him, seeing only the hollow form of the shaman who had once promised rain, light, and hope. Others stared, fascinated and horrified, witnessing the manifestation of the Great Spirit's judgment. Elder Nayeli stepped forward, staff in hand, eyes glistening with unshed tears. This is what happens when pride outruns wisdom, she whispered to the tribe. We have lost more than a shaman. We have lost balance, for the river does not forgive the defiance of one who would bend it to their will. Even Kaya, who had tried to warn him, felt her heart ache. She remembered his ambition, his visions, and his dreams of glory, but now all that remained was a tethered spirit, a warning etched into the river's eternal memory. Some villagers whispered among themselves, still clinging to hope. Perhaps he is chosen, they said. Perhaps the silence is only temporary. But Elder Nayeli shook her head. Silence is not temporary when it is demanded by the Great Spirit. Kaya and Nayeli knew the tribe could not survive by fear alone. They performed sacred rites at the river's edge, circling with herbs and offerings, singing songs of protection and balance. They called to the ancestors, invoking wisdom and harmony to shield the people from the restless energies left by Wakia's defiance. Incense curled upward in delicate spirals, carrying prayers into the night sky. Each chant and blessing was a thread of hope, a tether for the tribe's safety, even as Wakia's presence lingered like a shadow along the bank. Yet, despite the protective rites, there was no way to sever the connection between Wakia and the river. He was part of its silence now, a constant reminder of the consequences of arrogance. Night fell, and the villagers retreated to their homes, casting anxious glances toward the river. And there he was, Wakia, walking slowly along the water's edge, lips moving silently. The moonlight glinted off his ghostly form, illuminating eyes that seemed both human and empty. Children wide-eyed and trembling whispered to each other. Is he alive? One asked. Can he speak? No one dared answer. His voice was gone, yet his presence carried a weight that made even the wind seem to pause. Shadows clung to him as he moved, bending and stretching across the mud and reeds, his form half light, half shadow. Even the raven returned, circling above the silent shaman. It caught sharply once, before perching on a broken branch, watching the ghostly figure, as if guarding him or mocking him. One small child, braver than most, crept to the water's edge. Drawn by curiosity and the faint memory of the shaman before his fall, the child's feet pressed softly into the mud, eyes wide and trembling, as he peered up at Wakia's ghostly form. Do you still hear the river's voice? The child whispered, voice trembling in the night. Wakia turned, and though he could not speak, his lips moved, shaping the words he could no longer release. His eyes met the child's, conveying 1,000 things: regret, longing, defiance, and sorrow. The river remained silent, yet in Wakia's gaze, the echo of its voice seemed to linger like a song just beyond reach, a lesson too powerful to forget. The child shivered, stepping back, but never taking his eyes off the figure. In that moment, he glimpsed the truth of the river's silence, that it was not empty, but alive with judgment and memory, carrying both the punishment of pride and the weight of all lessons yet to be learned. In the following days, the tribe learned to live with the silence. They spoke more carefully, treated the river with renewed reverence, and shared stories of Wakia, not only his defiance, but the visions and teachings he had once embodied. Elder Nayeli and Kaya continued rites, praying for guidance and balance. Children were told of the young shaman who had dared challenge the Great Spirit and paid a price no one else could endure. They learned that humility was not weakness, that silence could teach more than speech, and that the river held memory and power beyond human command. At night, villagers sometimes saw him walking along the shore, the ghostly form tracing familiar paths, lips moving in silent chants. And always, the raven was nearby, a reminder that the spirit world watches those who trespass too far into pride. One evening, the small child returned, stepping softly into the moonlit mud. He whispered again, voice barely audible, "Do you still hear the river's voice?" And Wakia's lips trembled, shaping words that could not escape, while the river's silence seemed to listen, waiting, patient and eternal. The sun rose over a river, still heavy with memory. Its waters, once choked with drought and defiance, now shimmered with cautious life. Fish returned slowly, reeds swayed gently, and the wind no longer carried the oppressive weight of punishment. Yet the river remained different always, carrying a faint, eerie hush, as if the echo of what defiance lingered in every ripple. Along the banks, the tribe moved quietly, speaking with measured voices, offering thanks and whispered apologies to the river. They had learned the hard way that the balance of nature could not be forced, and that pride could summon silence where once there was song. In this new era of humility, one figure rose with purpose. Kaya stood at the river's edge. The mud cooled beneath her feet, incense curling in the early light. She was no longer the young apprentice who had feared Wakia's ambition. She had seen the consequences of pride, the cost of ignoring the wisdom of the elders, and the depth of the Great Spirit's judgment. With each chant, each carefully chosen word, she restored harmony. She guided the hunters, taught the children, and healed the sick, always mindful of balance. Her voice carried respect and reverence, never defiance. She told the tribe, "The river teaches us that power without humility is empty. The silence of one can echo through all. We must listen, or we risk repeating what we have lost." The villagers nodded, carrying her words in their hearts. Even the elders, including Nayeli, watched with quiet pride, knowing that the lessons of the past were being handed into safe, patient hands. Though life returned to the river, presence remained. At times, villagers glimpsed a ghostly shimmer along the water, the faint outline of a figure moving silently. His lips moved, words forming in the night air that never reached ears. Children would sometimes leave small offerings, feathers, polished stones, or bowls of water, hoping to appease the tethered spirit. Hunters spoke in hushed tones when he appeared, acknowledging him without fear. Mothers cautioned their children not to mock, not to point, and not to forget. The river carried all of this, its waters reflecting the past and present simultaneously. Where Wakia walked, the silence deepened, a constant reminder that defiance carries consequences that even time cannot erase. One night, Kaya slept beneath the stars, her body curled near the riverbank. The moon cast silver light across her blanket, and the wind whispered soft currents of unseen voices. In her dream, Wakia appeared, not in anger, but in sorrow. His eyes glimmered with regret, his form flickering like smoke above the water. His lips moved, forming words she could not hear, yet their meaning passed to her without sound. Balance is fragile. Pride steals life. Listen, even when voices are gone. Kaya awoke, heart racing. She understood that his silent regret was a gift as much as it was a curse. The cost of arrogance had been made painfully clear, and now she carried the responsibility of teaching the tribe without repeating his mistakes. The tribe's feelings toward Wakia were complex. They feared him for what his defiance had unleashed. They pitied him for the voice stolen by his own pride. And they revered him in a distant, quiet way. His presence along the riverbank, a reminder of the thin line between courage and hubris. Offerings became a nightly ritual. Stones were stacked by the water's edge, feathers floated in small baskets, and whispered prayers of forgiveness filled the night air. Even as they rebuilt their lives, they never forgot the shaman whose voice had once shaken the river, nor the silence that had followed. Elder Nayeli spoke to Kaya one evening, watching the river. Do you see how the river carries both life and memory? It never forgets. Neither should we. Kaya nodded. We honor him not by speaking for him, but by listening to what the silence teaches. Kaya knelt at the water's edge one evening, incense curling in gentle spirals. She prayed softly, hands pressed together in humility. If his spirit can never speak, may the river itself tell his tale. May the lessons of his silence reach those who follow. The river answered. At first, there was only the quiet of flowing water. Then, with sudden, breathtaking force, a rush of currents swept toward her. The surface sparkled unnaturally, twisting and curling as if unseen hands moved beneath the waves. The hairs on Kaya's arms stood on end. She felt the presence of Wakia's spirit, tethered, yet still reaching through the river, trying to communicate in the only way it could. The river roared, not with sound, but with motion, and Kaya realized that even in silence, the story of pride, defiance, and humility could be told, if only one was willing to watch, to listen, and to learn. The river pulsed beneath the moonlight, carrying Wakia's presence in every ripple. Kaya leaned closer, whispering to the wind, "Teach us, even in silence, and let the river speak his tale." And for a moment, the water surged as though answering, glittering with the quiet power of a story still unfolding. Time passed, and the river, though healed, carried memory as surely as it carried water. Seasons turned. Children grew into hunters, hunters into elders. Yet through all the cycles, one lesson remained etched into the hearts of the people. Never raise your voice above the spirits, for the river remembers. It was a saying repeated at the fireside, whispered under blankets on cold nights, and spoken with reverence before the first cast of a fishing line. The tale of Wakia, the shaman who dared defy the Great Spirit, had grown into legend, a story of ambition, pride, punishment, and enduring wisdom. Though his voice was gone, his presence lingered. Villagers spoke of shadows along the river at dusk, dark shapes, moving silently along the bank. Fishermen claimed that when currents shifted strangely, it was not the wind, but Wakia guiding them away from hidden rocks, deep holes, or treacherous rapids. He walks the river still, elders would say, not to harm, but to remind us. Balance is not punishment, alone it is protection, even in silence. Even the raven, his ancient companion in defiance, continued to circle the skies above the river. Some swore it was not the same bird, but a spirit sent to watch over tethered form, ensuring the lessons of silence endured. On certain nights, when the moon hung low and silver light poured across the water, the river seemed to hum. The sound was faint, almost imperceptible, a vibration that tickled the ears like the memory of a song forgotten long ago. Villagers stopped mid-step, holding breath, listening as the air vibrated with what they could not name. Some swore it was Wakia, still trying to speak through the river, each ripple a syllable, each wave a phrase, a silent language only the most attentive could decipher. Elder Naeli's granddaughter whispered to her mother one night, eyes wide, "I hear him. He is trying to tell us something." Her mother nodded solemnly. "The river remembers. We must listen, even if no words come." As generations passed, the story of Wakia became woven into every aspect of village life. Children were warned never to shout at the river, never to challenge the Great Spirit, never to let ambition blind them to harmony. Hunters carried small charms shaped like fish or river reeds, believing that Wakia's shadow guided them safely through waters both shallow and treacherous. Mothers hung feathers in windows to remind children of humility. Even the elders themselves bowed slightly whenever they approached the river, murmuring prayers to honor the lessons of the silenced shaman. The legend of Wakia became both cautionary tale and protective guardiana, reminder that the Great Spirit's patience is boundless, but not infinite. Sometimes, when the wind was still and the water glimmered unnaturally, the river seemed alive with unseen movement. Currents twisted in ways that no human hand could stir. Fish leaped in unison, as though guided by invisible fingers. Reeds bent without wind, as if bowing to a presence unseen. And then came the faintest hum of vibration of memory, the echo of a voice that no one could hear but everyone felt. Some claimed it was Wakia, still tied to the river, attempting to speak through the very currents that had condemned him. "You hear him?" one child asked an elder. "Yes," the elder replied, voice trembling. "But you must never call to him. Listen only, for even a whisper can carry the weight of a shaman's silence." On nights when the hum grew stronger, when the water rippled unnaturally, the villagers whispered among themselves, "Would you dare call out to the river on such a night? Would you risk the silence that follows pride?" Many shook their heads. Few dared approach the riverbank, alone. Even the bravest hunters paused before speaking, knowing the river carried memory and judgment, and that Wakia's shadow watched patiently, bound yet alert, ready to remind them of lessons learned long ago. It was during such a night, when the moon poured silver across the trembling water, that a young hunter approached the river alone. His footsteps were soft, almost hesitant, but he felt the tug of destiny as surely as the current tugged at the reeds. The river's surface rippled unnaturally, reflecting his face in fractured patterns, and then he heard it. A whisper, soft as mist, curling around the edges of the water, weaving through the reeds. "Wakia." The hunter froze, his heart thundered. The name was not his own, yet it echoed the first vision that Wakia had once seen, the same vision that had driven him toward defiance, pride, and punishment. The river seemed to hold its breath, waiting. The hunter, trembling, whispered back, though unsure if the river could hear him, or if the river even wished to reply. In that moment, he realized the weight of Wakia's legacy. The Great Spirit had not abandoned the river, nor the tribe. The silence was alive. The river remembered, and the voice it carried, though bound, still reached those who dared to listen carefully enough. The hunter's eyes widened as the river whispered again, curling around his name like smoke over water, Wakia. And somewhere, deep beneath the surface, the river held its breath, waiting for the next word, the next lesson, the next moment, when pride and humility would meet once more. The sun rose over the river once more, spilling gold across waters that had long carried the weight of memory. Under Kaya's guidance, the tribe thrived again. Fields stretched green along the banks, fish leaped freely in the river, and the wind carried not the oppression of punishment, but the gentle reminder of balance and respect. The people moved with reverence, no longer seeking to command nature or spirits, but to walk in harmony with them. The lessons of the past, hard-earned and heavy, had shaped the way they lived, spoke, and prayed. Kaya walked the riverbanks each morning, her voice lifting in gentle chants that honored the Great Spirit. Her wisdom was a bridge between generations, a living testament to humility and understanding. Children followed her footsteps, mimicking the careful gestures of prayer, learning that power without respect was meaningless. Hunters and fishermen whispered gratitude to the river as they worked, bowing silently when Wakia's ghostly form occasionally shimmered along the water's edge. Though he could not speak, his presence was not malevolent. It reminded them of the fragile line between courage and arrogance, ambition and hubris. The tribe had learned to live alongside silence, both terrifying and instructive, on to listen to the river's endless whispers of balance. The narrator's voice drifts over the scene, calm yet commanding. Wakia's silence became the loudest lesson of all. His voice, once defiant, now impossible to hear, carries more weight than words ever could. Through his punishment, the tribe learned that the Great Spirit does not bend to pride. It does not answer to those who seek control. Instead, it teaches through quiet, through patience, and through the subtle power of humility. The river glimmers, reflecting the sky, the trees, and the spirits that linger unseen. Every ripple, every current, every shimmer is a reminder that actions echo far beyond their origin. The Great Spirit's will is clear and unyielding. Pride may rise, voices may shout, but only respect and understanding can flow with the river. And the world? The water carries every story, every voice, every prayer. Yet the loudest echoes are not always those of the living. They are the lessons left by those who dared and failed to challenge what cannot be commanded. The tribe now prays with intention, sings with gratitude, and teaches with wisdom. Each generation adds to the story, recounting Wakia not merely as a cautionary figure, but as a guardian spirit whose silence shaped their understanding. The river carries every voice, but it keeps the proudest in silence. Speak with respect, or not at all. These words, passed from parent to child, elder to apprentice, became a mantra for the village. They reminded everyone that the power to command nature or the spirits does not come from audacity, but from harmony, patience, and humility. Wakia's presence lingered not as a threat, but as a teacher, a silent echo of the cost of defiance. Every ripple in the river was a reminder that even in silence, wisdom speaks louder than words. The narrator leans closer in voice, drawing the listener into the timeless lesson. If you stood at the river's edge, would you listen, or would you dare to speak? Would your pride risk the silence that carries the weight of generations? The river remembers all voices. It honors those who respect it, and it keeps the defiant bound forever in quiet reflection. The audience feels the tension, the weight of Wakia's story, and the profound stillness of the river lessons that are eternal, yet personal, echoing in hearts willing to listen. Even in eternity, the river listens. Even in silence, the lesson speaks. The Great Spirit watches, the waters remember, and the bound shaman's story flows endlessly, waiting for those who dare to truly hear.